Over the years, the gaming industry has come out with some really difficult games. This comes in a variety of ways, from platformers like Super Meat Boy to combat-based games like Dark Souls and beat-em-ups from the 80s. All hard games are not made equal, however. Some games drive you to get better and finally complete them, while others drive you to abandon the game in frustration. So what distinguishes the two? Watch this video to find out. Hello everyone, and welcome to another Fireside chat. Today we're discussing a topic near and dear to my heart, the difficulty of a video game. While some people are quick to put something down if they don't beat it on their first try, I personally love a good challenge, especially when it comes to gaming. You can't match the satisfaction of trying a level over and over, learning a few new things each time, and then finally beating it. A hard game makes each win truly feel like a victory, while an easy game just gets boring after a while. That being said, sometimes video games take the difficulty way too far. A steep learning curve or punishing game mechanics sometimes just makes the game impossible to play, encouraging players to put the game down rather than persevering. Sometimes people will never pick the game up again if it gets too frustrating. On the other hand, sometimes the immense difficulty of a game, like in the case of Super Meat Boy, doesn't decrease its popularity but makes it stand out against other games of its genre. So where's the sweet spot? How do game makers make the perfect difficulty for their video game? Before we get into the nitty-gritty of difficulty, it's important to start with a few key definitions. First of all, how do we objectively define something so subjective as difficulty? For our purposes, difficulty will be defined as the amount of skill the game requires versus the average skill of the player. Here's where we need to make an important distinction: the potential skill of the player versus the average skill of the player. While some players can be very good at the game and some very bad, in order to assess difficulty, we need to look at how well the game prepares the player, not how prior experiences or ability may aid the gamer. The skill level of the player is the most important element of difficulty. While one particular level may be very hard, whether it's at the beginning or the end of the game has a huge impact on the game's difficulty. This means that there has to be a difficulty curve in order to successfully maintain a game's difficulty. This is illustrated perfectly by the models in the corners of the screen. Make it too difficult and the player will feel anxious and upset. Make it too easy and the player will be bored. As the sloping nature of the graph suggests, not only do you have to establish the difficulty, but it has to grow with the player in order to keep their attention. So not only do you have to set the right difficulty, but you have to make sure it grows as the player grows. Now, there are two different ways to create a difficulty curve: artificial or design difficulty. Design difficulty is where the developer actually adds new abilities and moves for the bosses or enemies to gain, either strengthening or weakening them. This means that the player, as difficulty increases, not only has to get better at the game overall, but actually learn and master different abilities to adapt. Artificial difficulty is where the game designer simply increases the stats of the enemies as the game progresses. Of course, design difficulty is much more dynamic and interesting for the player, but also is a lot more time and energy for the developer. In my opinion, a hearty mix of the two, perhaps a few new moves as well as several stat boosts, creates a compelling difficulty for the player and an easy experience for the developer. So now we know how and when to fluctuate the difficulty of a video game. But where do we start? Of course, giving the player the option of selecting their own difficulty setting is by far the most convenient choice for the player, but this does little to benefit the game's image. Like we talked about earlier, many games take notorious spots in history for being ridiculously hard. While this is not the most rewarding way to gain press in terms of player enjoyment, maintaining the game's image is one thing to think about while choosing the game's base difficulty. If you want to incorporate both of these ideas, maybe make your easy mode more like a normal mode, normal more like a hard, and hard more like an expert mode. This will give your game both versatility and notability. But before you can truly analyze the difficulty of a game, you have to keep in mind the psychological implications of difficulty. What drives the player to succeed? Is it in-game incentives and currency? Is it personal drive to complete the game? Or is it a little bit of both? Anything that drives someone to attempt or complete something can be categorized in either intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. This is where those examples from earlier come into play. Somebody intrinsically motivated plays the game because it makes them feel good, because completing it gives them a sense of personal accomplishment. Extrinsically motivated people, on the other hand, are motivated by incentives, rewards, and prizes. Both of these factors can be manipulated to increase the likelihood of somebody completing and finishing your game. In-game incentives, like achievements, currency, and item awards for especially hard battles can help to extrinsically motivate your players. Even something like a really good cutscene or story moment after your fight can be extrinsic motivation. You have to be careful with rewards though. A truly grueling fight with not much to earn from completing it can make your game more punishing than rewarding, and that will push players away from your game. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, isn't so cut and dry. In order to understand intrinsic motivation, we have to talk about something called self-determination theory. This is the idea that humans have three essential needs: autonomy, the casual parts of your life that go smoothly and are integrated into your life; competence, the ability to control the outcome of your life and master skills; and relatedness, the desire to be connected to and care for others. The part of this that most relates to what we're talking about here is competence. The player wants to be challenged, but needs to feel like they have control over the outcome of the game, and will eventually be able to master its concepts and surmount its obstacles. Each time they die and restart the game, the player needs to feel some sense of progress. There are four main aspects that a game designer can add to a game to make it feel more rewarding. These include cues, reaction time, feedback, and, most importantly, the ability to learn from your mistakes. The first two aspects are mostly self-explanatory. The boss must give some type of cue, and that cue must be given in enough time that the player can react to it. If a boss randomly kills everything in an unmarked area of the battlefield every 10 seconds, there's nothing you can do to dodge that. That's not just a difficult fight, it's an impossible one. On the other hand, if there's a marker on the ground indicating the attack radius, that allows you to learn and grow from your mistakes. Feedback is important too, whether this is direct through hints given on the respawn screen or indirect through clear visual cues of what exactly killed you. It's a very important step in the learning process. When the player dies, the animations must clearly display the player's mistake. If the gamer can't figure out how they died or what their error was, they can't make any improvements in the future. This leads to the last and most important element of a fair and rewarding difficulty level. The player must be able to learn from their mistakes and get a little better each time they fail. Take Super Meat Boy for instance. If you die on razor blades trying to climb up a wall, you might learn the timing after a few tries, or even find a side route to completely avoid the obstacle altogether. The key is learnability. You're not just trying the same thing over and over again. Each new try is a learning experience all on its own. Overall, there's definitely a certain difficulty to choosing the perfect difficulty. As if finding the balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivators and artificial and designed difficulty wasn't difficult enough already, there's also the matter of self-determination theory, which plays into the psychological aspects of game difficulty. The biggest takeaway here is to make sure your game is difficult, but not punishing. Giving the player the opportunity to learn and grow from each of their mistakes makes a difficult game, not a punishing one. To feel fair, not only do enemies have to give enough cue, also in time for the player to react to it, but the game must also give feedback so the player knows how to learn and grow from their errors. Remember that extreme difficulty draws fame as well. Games like Dark Souls and Super Meat Boy are so well known primarily because of their immense difficulty. So from the game designer end, keep in mind your marketing and image when it comes to difficulty. And from the consumer end, make sure not to buy something just because it's notoriously hard. Know your limits. Everyone's patience has an end, and it's important to keep in mind that if a game is not fun, well, where's its purpose? And with that, remember, we didn't start the fire, we just keep it burning. Thanks for watching. What's the hardest game you've ever played? Let us know in the comments section below, and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's Fireside Chat. The hardest game I've ever played has got to be Super Meat Boy. I've had that game for years and still have yet to beat it. Of course, games with fan-made levels like Super Mario Maker and Beat Saber can be really hard as well, so don't discredit those when you recount your hardest gaming experiences. Once again, I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and thanks for watching.